All right, so here we are with classification part two. Um, I'm going to kind of rush through some of this because we've already talked about a lot of the characteristics of kingdom Animalia here. So let's take a look. We've already discussed the fact that animals are heterotrophic, multicellular, eukaryotic, that most of them reproduce sexually. There are a few that reproduce asexually, and we talked about what those were with the sponges, and there are some echinoderms like with a sea star and whatnot that can reproduce asexually. And what does that mean? Remember, that means that produces a genetically identical organism to the parent. Um, Differences between plants and animals. Let's take a look at some. Plants have a cell wall made of cellulose. Animal cells don't have a cell wall at all. Both plants and animals have cell membranes. Both of them have cell membranes, but animal cells do not have a cell wall. Plants do have organs, leaves and flowers. With an animal, our organs tend to be internal, things like the kidneys, heart, lungs, etc. Plants are autotrophic, they produce their own food. Animals are heterotrophic, they do not produce their own food. Same thing would be true for fungi. Plants do move, but they don't move a great deal. But there are some who move that do move a whole lot more than you think that they might. Most animals are freely moving, but remember when we were talking about animals, there are several animals that are referred to as being sessile, meaning they don't move. Um, there are no organs on a plant that are specifically for excretory purposes, although the stomata on a leaf are responsible for allowing a plant to get rid of excess oxygen and whatnot like that. Animals, on the other hand, do possess excretory organs. Um, Plants do tend to respond slowly to environmental changes, whereas animals tend to respond pretty quickly. So if you kind of ignore this first column over here with calling it kingdom protista, because there's no such thing as kingdom protista. But here are characteristics of kingdom Plantae, Animalia, and fungi. And then this would be all of the other kingdoms, which I showed you on a slide earlier, which would be things like amoeba, paramecia, euglena, slime moles, those sorts of things. Usually single-celled organisms. But they're all eukaryotic. They are all eukaryotic. So everything that you see on this page right here are all in domain eukarya. They are all eukaryotic cells. So here are some study websites, and if you pull this up on the non-recorded slide deck, you can click on these links and get to each one of those. Same thing here for the middle grades case, and so there you have it. So this actually is a diagram of a cell membrane. This is a diagram of a cell membrane. Remember, all cells have cell membranes, and so you have this diagram of a cell membrane here, and this kind of will get us into our cell lecture, which will be coming up next. So we have these membrane structures that are in eukaryotic cells. You can see them. The chloroplast is a plant cell. And then we have membrane around the nucleus, a membrane around the chloroplast. We have Golgi apparatus, and we're going to get to all of those organelles when we look at when we have our cell lecture here. But all of the structures are surrounded by membranes in a eukaryotic cell. And so we'll talk more about these in the cell lecture. But a mitochondrion, this is the membrane-bound organelle that is responsible for taking sugars, primarily glucose. In fact, not even glucose, but is a sugar called pyruvate, which glucose is broken down into pyruvate before it goes into the mitochondrion. And the mitochondrion oxidizes this sugar in order to produce a chemical called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And that's the currency of energy in a cell. And that's called respiration, cellular respiration. And since it uses oxygen, we refer to as aerobic respiration. Chloroplasts, on the other hand, are only found in plant cells. Mitochondria are found in all cells, all eukaryotic cells, but chloroplasts are only found in plant cells, and then those things like the photosynthetic algae and whatnot. And they allow a plant to make use of energy from the sun in order to produce glucose. And it is definitely membrane bound. In fact, one of the coolest things about both mitochondria and chloroplasts, they were in all likelihood free living life forms before we see them inside eukaryotic cells. Both mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA. They reproduce on their own, and they have structures very much the double membrane system that is very similar to the double membrane system that we see in bacteria. So physiologically, mitochondria and chloroplasts are very much like bacteria. So essentially, this was a symbiotic relationship in order to form eukaryotic cells in the first place. That's called the theory of endosymbiosis, and we'll get into that a little bit more. There are some organelles that are not membrane bound, things like microtubules and microfilaments. These are just essentially protein tubes. So these particular organelles are not bound by the same membrane that binds all of the rest of them, because essentially these are just tubes of protein. And then ribosomes. Ribosomes are found in both prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, and their primary purpose is to make protein. Centrioles are an organelle that's used to help with and makes microtubules, which makes cellular division possible. Most cells have an organelle on the outside, which is a type of it's a protein structure, but it allows them to move. It allows them to be motile. They're called cilia or flagella. Cilia would go around the cell typically, whereas the flagella is at the back, kind of like a long tail. And here you can see this paramecium has cilia all over it, whereas this algal cell has long flagella that allow it to swim. Inside the nucleus of a eukaryotic cell, we do have a nucleolus. The nucleolus does not control the nucleus. The nucleolus is where ribosomes are being produced. The nucleus is where we have all of the genetic material. It's not situated just in the nucleolus. Then you have a nuclear membrane, which completely surrounds the nucleus with pores. And those pores are where DNA transcripts, or rather RNA, would leave the nucleus and go out to be expressed. Chromatin, which is loosely organized DNA. You will only find DNA bound up in the form of chromosomes when a cell is getting ready to reproduce. And with that, I will end this particular lecture, and we'll move along to the cells lecture.